Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Genius Conversation. This is a monthly endeavor that we have begun, talking to interesting people with a common theme, that of good corporate governance. How do we ensure our companies are being run in the most effective way we can? How are we embracing our people? How are we embracing doing the right thing in business and ensuring that all those are supporting good purpose, decent profit, because we have to be sustainable as businesses, but also looking after our respective stakeholders, particularly our internal stakeholder. So that will be a theme of many of the conversations we'll be having for the rest of the year. This month is still just International Women's Month, and Genius Boards is celebrating the role of women in the boardroom, the role of women in business and in leadership and in our executive teams. We all know women lead at home. It's now how do we make sure they lead equally in all opportunities? And we'll be talking a lot about different words that we use in this space. I'm CEO of Genius Boards and Genius Methods, and I'm looking forward to enjoying some time with you here today. We have with us a very, very special guest. Came across Jacqui. It's amazing the kinds of environments you might be in where you get to meet really interesting people. And we came across each other through one of these social networking groups. And she was talking about being able to talk about things in terms of International Women's Day and embracing equity, which is what is the title of our talk today. So we are going to be understanding, first of all, what those words mean. Those are going to be quite critical. But let me just talk a few words about our guest. Our guest is a really interesting lady. Her age defies what she has done in her career already. She's moved from the BBC, where she was involved in various programs. BBC 1, 2, and 3 is the ones I remember just reading about a few moments ago. And she's taken that skill in communication and now uses that to help businesses build diverse pipelines. So she's had a couple of businesses where she's been involved, particularly during the pandemic, for example. She helped those in hospital get technology to allow them to be able to communicate with their families during the period that they weren't allowed visitors. So she really is quite innovative in doing lots of unique things, but there's a commonality there. It's about people. She's all about communication and about people and making the most of the people around her. And she's taken that skill now into a company called Wider Thinking. We're helping them understand the value of diversity and what diversity can bring to business and helping businesses to embrace it, because it's very difficult to embrace something you don't understand. So she helps that understanding process. Anyway, we are now going to have a conversation. So maybe to start, Jacqui, first of all, welcome. We've lost your voice.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go. That's a bit better.
Yeah, I'm all good. Phew.
That's better. Cool.
Well, I shall project my voice.
Welcome. Thank you very much. I think the first thing maybe what we should do is just put it in context, because this is International Women's Month, and the whole theme internationally has been around embracing equity. Maybe you could talk a bit about International Women's Day and about embracing equity, sort of high level, before, just to get people into the right mood and understanding what we're here to talk about.
Sure. Yes. I like that. The kind of like the little warm up. Let's get people's bodies moving. It's early morning. And yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in to hear what we've got to say today. So yeah, as you were saying, Sharon, this is still International Women's Month. And the theme this year is embrace equity. And those are two words that sound quite cool, but what exactly does that mean? So let's take a look at equity first of all, because I think, like embracing most things in life, we should get to know it a little bit better first. So really, what is equity? Well, I can start by saying what it isn't, and it is not the same as equality. Some people may use the two words interchangeably, but they have real distinct differences. And we often see the E in EDI interchanging from equity to equality and maybe back to equity again. And I'm team equity. And here's why. It's really simple. Equality is everything is the same. We all get the same thing. And that works if everybody is exactly the same and everybody needs exactly the same thing. And so having the same resources or opportunities sounds great, but a blanket set of solutions often fails to identify the specific needs of individuals and minority groups. And it often doesn't address deeper seated issues like underrepresentation or unique needs or perhaps an unfair status quo. And so equity is when we have resources according to need, and we recognise that it's not enough to give everybody the same thing. And I can give some real world examples that kind of really help visualise that. So if you take, for example, say 5 bikes, you've got 5 identical bikes, then that's equality. But actually, 5 people can be very different, and those bikes may not suit their needs or their desires. And so you might have somebody who needs to carry a toddler, and so they need it to have a toddler seat, or you might need somebody that's a bit unsteady, and so they need those little stabilizers on. Or you may have a wheelchair user that uses a bike where you pedal with your arms, or you may have a child, and so this bike is way too big for them. And so equity is about giving everybody a bike, but that suits their needs and their desires. And so I think that helps people kind of visualize really simply in the real world what equity is. And we're surrounded by examples of equity. In fact, a really good example, which I like to talk about, which might sound a bit weird, is toilets. But bear with me.
Okay.
Yeah, bear with me, because I appreciate that many buildings are making changes, but historically, buildings had equal floor space for men's and women's toilets, and that's equality. However, Sharon, we all know about the unfairness or inequality of those queues wherever you go, whether it's to the cinema, the theatre, concerts, whatever it is. There is not equality in those queues.
The outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And that's because, equal floor space, but in the women's toilets, cubicles take more space than urinals. So there are fewer of them. We have periods. We have weaker bladders from pregnancy and childbirth. So this means more frequent visits. Children are more often, sweeping generalization, but they are more often taken to women's toilets. The elderly, who are disproportionately women, take longer and need more frequent visits. And so there we see a real example of equality not quite working, or not being quite as fair as it should be.
So I think the importance is understanding that equity gives a fairness within groupings, for example, men and women, or how you've used them as well. Yeah. So it's making sure that those within a group are treated equally, so that you get equity within a environment, not equality across everything. Yeah. So once you get within your space, then you get a degree. When you get within your sort of pockets of place, then you get equality within those pockets, because they are the same. So it's actually quite interesting. And you're right, we do see those two words interchangeably lost. with each other. And hopefully our audience now has a far better understanding.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for giving some clarity on that one. Because I spend my time in corporate boardrooms and talking to boards about their purpose, why they're there, what are they trying to achieve as the board of directors of that organization. And I also lecture on boardroom dynamics to students, younger sort of in their 20s, 30s, coming into the boardrooms as company secretaries. And we talk about E, S, and G and the modern agenda and how companies need to embrace the new topics that we need to talk about. We can't pretend they don't exist anymore. Our customers demand them, our employees demand it, our stakeholders demand it. But the thing I like to unpack a little bit is we talk about environment, social, and governance. If we don't have governance first, we need the foundation, we need the building blocks of setting up our corporations, our companies, our SMEs, our sole partnerships with a sound foundation. We need to get the governance right. We need to have a purpose to our business. We need to be there for a good reason. We need to understand our sustainability. And with that comes our policies, our procedures, our compliance, our conformance, our structure of our business. All those things need to be right first.
Yeah.
We can get that right. We can now start talking about the people element, which I'm going to leave a little bit more for you to talk about. And once we've got our people and our foundation, and they are working in harmony, we are in a very safe place as a business to now embrace the E and the environment part that we're talking about, where we need to look at the more ethereal, bigger picture, what we need to do to save our planet and give our children something to live on. I don't know what your view is. Maybe talk a little bit to the S in ESG.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think they're all kind of the same side, the same sides of the coin, in that we have to approach everything together, and I think we have to. The ESG field needs an objective standard for reporting social outcomes, and I think that outcomes-based standards are designed to measure the quantum of social change that was realised as a result of a programme or a strategy or an intervention, and so in terms of the S, it has to be incorporated where we are fulfilling our responsibility and our role. And I think a really interesting point that's often discussed is that the E often outweighs the S in terms of priority and focus. And actually the S really is so fundamentally important, because it is about our people. And so we have to approach this with strategy, with policy, with a drive in terms of how are we fulfilling our duty and our responsibility in terms of it all filters out. If we have better people, then, and more diverse thinking, then we will be better equipped to cope with everything else that filters out, whether it's about our planet, our society, our environment, everything else. But it fundamentally starts with diverse people, to have diverse thinking, to create more innovation, to create better productivity, and the outcomes will filter from there.
If we don't have that diverse engagement, how do we know what is doing the right thing? I know what I think, and I know you and I think quite similarly, but you're going to think slightly differently.
Exactly.
I think when you get into a boardroom environment, into a senior leadership team, and also, okay, well, we got out of bed this morning with the best intentions in the world. We came here to do the right thing. So do directors. But we achieve quite often the opposite. not intentionally, but as a function of being a dysfunctional group of people that haven't worked out how to work together as a diverse team, having proper leadership of our diversity. Let's just talk quickly. We've talked about the social part of it, the people element of ES&G. So if you come down that sort of filter, I come down to DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you have touched upon the diversity issue and how that embraces better decision-making, better engagement. I don't know, is there anything you want to sort of add within the context of DE&I rather than just within the S of social? Is there anything you'd like to add there?
Well, I can talk about this all day long. I could talk about it all day long. I think, yeah, it is proven. It is proven that more diversity in your organization does make your organization more robust. So it future-proofs your organization. And also it helps you bring along more people. Because if you have more diversity, not only have you got creative thinking, and like you say, if we all turn up and we're all sitting around the table and we all look the same, if we all think the same, if we've all got really similar experiences, then our outcomes are going to be quite predictable, and that's not the best place to be, because we are surrounded by groupthink because we're all thinking the same, and therefore, as a consequence, we will have blind spots. We will have many blind spots because there aren't voices at the table with different lived experience. We haven't got that variety for somebody to pop up and go, "Hey, have we thought about this?" Or, "Hey, well, I've got this experience of that." And that's what you want. That's what you want when you're sitting around your board table. You want many voices. You don't want just one person taking over and everybody just nodding and then walking out. And it's kind of like, where's the innovation? Where's the safety in that? And I think just going back to bringing people with you, there is, not only is there, going back to the S in society, there's a real responsibility in terms of equality and equity for all. But if you just want to look at it from a business sense, you don't want to get left behind. You don't want to be one of the dinosaurs, and we know what happened to them. You want to be thriving. You want to be moving forward. You want to see that you are embracing equity, but not just for International Women's Month, but for the rest of your organization's life, in that you need to bring more people in so that you look more attractive and that you are more attractive, because people will see that this is a place where I would like to work because there are people like me here, and you will attract better talent, and people will stay with you. And also, if you are really serious about ED&I, then your stakeholders will you will attract, your stakeholders will know that you are a more robust organization. And also your clients, your supply chain, your customers, your talent that you want to attract and keep, all of that, it just has this huge positive impact on how you run your organization. People will see that this is a place for people like me, and that it is an open, honest organization, which we can talk a little bit more about. But also you will retain your people. And we know that that's a real issue around talent. Not only are we in these turbulent economic and political times, are we nervous about or thinking about how do we retain our customer base, but also we need to think about how do we retain our talent base. And if you think about the money that you spend in terms of staff, a key talent attraction, and onboard and recruitment and onboarding people and nurturing people, you can reduce those costs by reducing your staff turnover. And the way that you reduce your staff turnover is to embrace EDI so that when people come, they stay and they see this is a really great place for me. And I think, you know, even if you don't care about anything else and all you care about is the bottom line, then ED&I is for you, because it is proven. And also you have to pay more money to attract great people if this isn't a great place to work. You have to, if your culture has a bad reputation, if your brand has a bad reputation, then we know there are places that people don't feel particularly proud of working for, but they go there because the money's great. Now, thinking about if you have got a fantastic place where you don't have to keep throwing money at the problem because it's genuinely a fantastic place to work, then that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's gonna keep the FD happy.
And also, it does support one of our key corporate governance requirements.
Yeah.
I think it's Principle B.
Yeah.
Second most important thing in our code is we have to, as a board and an executive, consider the long-term sustainability of the organization. You can't do that if you're wasting money. And the things I wanted to just pick up on, we talk about diversity and everyone goes gender. Yes, gender is an absolutely critical one. It's in our face. It's a 50-50 plus the area in between where we've got a mix where you've got male, female, and all the other groups of gender that we have. But it's primarily a male-female thing, and it's something that is very visible. Now, we talk about the visible diversities and the non-visible diversities. But if you look at the visible ones that we are most likely to remember and recognize and consider as a executive team, age. Now, we see the value of bringing in people with 40 years of business experience. We see the value of bringing somebody straight out of university who thinks innovatively and are not killed by this is the way we do it here. So we see the value of age. We see the value of ethnicity and racial differences because they're not quite the same thing. So looking at people's backgrounds, whether it is their religion, whether it is their country, whether it is their language, whether it's the way they speak, their dialect, all those things bring another quite easily visible difference. We have things like cognitive diversity. Some people have got a lot more IQ than others. Not good or bad, it's just different. Another group of people have got different EQ versus each other. And you put that into the mix when we get to what we're typically talking about is cognitive diversity and the way people think. And that brings us to the whole point of the new institute that's come out with Charlotte Balleur on neurodiversity. So there's another aspect of the way our brains work and the way we are wired. We end up with these differences that we've just talked about now. So I'd like to liken it to if I had a menagerie of animals at a zoo, the monkeys, the snakes, the rabbits, the lions, I can't treat them equally. They are so diverse. One's going to fly off and the other one's going to bite me. I'm going to get very different responses from that team. And we talk about being aligned to our goals. It's going to be a difficult one to align to anything. Whereas if I sit with a room full of dogs from a little Pekingese right the way up to a Great Dane, at least they're dogs. I know how they are going to behave. So that diversity, however it is extreme, is still aligned. So it's bringing the value of diversity to the conversation. So anyway, that's a bit of a side discussion, because we so often see that organizations don't get that aligning of diversity. They do diversity for the sake of ticking a box. And I find that quite a dangerous place to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think, you know, I think we are definitely aligned in our thinking in that boards need to have many voices at the table, but also those voices need to be heard. And diversity in senior leadership should be a priority. Therefore, equity initiatives which support diverse employees will give everyone an opportunity to grow into these positions. And equity and equality is only possible if leadership and HR are committed to identifying and providing the support that each individual within an organisation needs to be successful. And I think touching on that point, which I think is really interesting, what you've said, is that it isn't, a diversity is not just about gender or ethnicity. There is so much more. When we look at neurodiversity, if we look at visible and invisible disabilities, when we look at sexual orientation, when we look at socioeconomic mix, and I think that's something that's also forgotten about, or
it's very prevalent.
And very prevalent, and there really is a bias towards certain accents, and therefore, you know, all of this in the workplace is leading, if it isn't a healthy culture in the workplace, then people are masking who they really are at work. And if you are putting energy into masking that you are dyslexic or ADHD or gay, or you coming from a lower socioeconomic background, that energy, thinking about the energy that you are pouring into that in order to fit in, code switch, fitting in, masking, it's all the same thing. It takes up so much energy. And imagine if you didn't have to do that, that energy could go into being productive, innovative, creative, then, and you are able to thrive and just pour all your energy into just being at work and doing an amazing job, then what the outcome for your organization is, it's obvious what the outcome is going to be. So yeah, I think that's a really important point about the fact that there is a lot more to diversity than a couple of little tick boxing exercises. If we've got a woman on the board, or we have got a black person on the board, or we post something for Pride every year, which also leads me to the tick boxing and tokenism. It's so obvious. We can smell it, we can see it, we can feel it when it is a tick boxing exercise, and it just doesn't work. And in fact, it brings no value, and your brand and your reputation is going to really suffer from that. Because it's okay going back to the cost and retention, it's okay kind of bringing some people in to tick a box. But if those people, that's to tick your diversity box, but then you've also got to make them feel included and have a sense of belonging. Otherwise, those people aren't going to stay. And then also you've got that turnover cost. But when people leave, people know this is not a great place to work if you're this, or if you're that, or if whatever. So you really have to work on not being a tick boxing organization. Because, or for example, if you're thinking about, like, just bringing my point back to attracting key talent, we know that when an interview is taking place, it isn't just the organization interviewing the candidate anymore. You know, those days are gone, my friend. That candidate is interviewing your organization. You know, that candidate has got options, and they want to know, what are you doing, and what are you, if you haven't got a robust answer when a candidate who you really want to come and work for your company, if they pose the question, what exactly are you doing around ED&I, what is your strategy, what is your policy, what is your measurement, how, tell me more. And if you're kind of fumbling around, you've lost that person. And we know, you know, people, this is so much more front of mind for people. This is so much the increased awareness of this importance. So people know if you're bluffing, and if you're just doing a little bit of tokenism.
Exactly.
So you need to have things in place so that you can be solid and proud of what you're doing.
And to your point, exactly that is, if we breathe and our heartbeat is inclusive, we have a mindset of inclusivity, of openness, of a safe place. The I at the end. So let's go back to turning things upside down. We have to be inclusive first, so that we then have the right approach, so that we can treat people with equity and respect, and listen to them, and to give them a place where they can be. We were talking earlier, and the thought that came across my mind is, if it's the right place for everyone, it makes them happy. The spend at the NHS, their spend in depression will all disappear, as well as the company saving money and them saving energy. They're not going to end up emotionally in a bad place. But the important thing is, if we're going to have diversity that works, we really, really, really do need good quality leadership that knows how to work with diversity, that the outcome is greater than the sum of its individual parts. And to that point, one of the conversations you and I had when we were first chatting was around measurement. Now, a lot of women get extremely sensitive about quotas. We are not a quota. We are here because of our genuine ability to be the right person. So we all have these very mixed views on things like quotas, but we've also got things like measurements, comparisons, benchmarks. Maybe we can just explore that area, and how can businesses value from it?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you've brought that up, because I feel really passionate about measurement. And you can call it quotas, targets, measurement. I just call it accountability. And you cannot leave things to happen organically. There is no drive or no real understanding of where you are today to map and evaluate if you don't have measurement. You need a framework. You can't just shift the playing field. You need data. You need to understand. You need to map where you are today in order to evaluate where you're going tomorrow. And this isn't about somebody feeling that they are, I am a quota. If somebody feels that, then you have to go back to exploring your culture and how people have a sense of belonging within your organization, for somebody to feel that. But data is integral. You need consistent and valid metrics to enable you to measure changes in behavior, and through different stages of what's happening in the evolution of your organization. And you need data to inform your board, your leadership, your decision makers, to make the right choices in order to dismantle any structures which will prevent your organization from being more inclusive. It gives statistical, couldn't get that word out. It gives statistical evidence about how you drive your policy change, how you demonstrate change, and the impact of any EDI projects. So you can't, if you've got whatever your budget and time and energy is for ED&I, you don't want to go off on a tangent. You want to know, what are we doing? Where are we going with this? Because again, going back to the point, if everybody around the table is exactly the same, they're going to go off on a tangent with big assumptions. Whereas if you've got many voices around the table, then that's going to help in terms of focusing where your ED&I energy and budget needs to go. And when I talk about measurement, for example, when we do measurement for organizations, we actually find that organizations are more diverse than they actually realize. But it's just going back to my point about a lot of people are masking at work. But also, when you start doing your measurement, it's not a bad thing. I think a lot of organizations are quite nervous about doing any kind of measurement or getting data around who their people are. Because they fear that, oh, this isn't going to look good, because I kind of can see that we're not great at embracing diversity here. But that's okay. It's not something to reprimand your organization with, and it's not. It's about how you approach it. You don't come to it with shame, and you come to it with humility and vulnerability and openness and a real kind of positivity in, like, if it's not great, it's like, okay, this is our starting point. This is our baseline. This is showing that we really want to take this journey seriously. We want to look at where we are now. We want to map it. And then we're going to look at this in a year's time. And hopefully we'll have made progress in the next 12, 18 months. We're going to do some targeted strategy, and we're going to develop this, and we're just going to keep evolving. And I think that is where I can see where organizations are nervous about measurement. But don't be. It's okay. It's okay. Just as long as you come into it with a bit of positivity, not trying to cover things up, and just with openness, and it will drive change. It's a long journey. And it's got to start somewhere, but you've got to know where you are now, and then also, then in 2 years' time you'll look back and go, wow, look at where we were in 23, and look at where we are now. So you've got to start somewhere, and you need some statistical evidence.
And that journey, it's so data. Compare gap analysis, reassessment, really is very supportive of the doubters. It gives them something to say, actually, I can see it now. I now have some kind of evidence that's giving me a comfort that we are in a better place now. And this is an example of how I can measure it. Okay, I can see our staff churn has gone down. I've seen that people have now stayed in the organization for longer. Our well-being index is looking a lot stronger. People are talent moving around the business rather than out the business. All these things, people will then start to say, that saves us money, that makes us more sustainable, therefore we're a better organization and the way we're running it. Just to the audience, bear in mind we do have a Q&A opportunity. So if you want to put anything into the Q&A function, please, I can see it, I will respond to it, and I'll pick up those questions with Jacqui. So please put your specific questions up if you would like it. The DE&I are things that we see in organizations. I witnessed a financial services organization who had been informed by the regulator, you will bring in diversity. And the other thing they were required was to consider the customer. They believed that they considered the customer, and the regulator said the customer's got to be at the heart of your business. And they didn't quite understand what that meant. They thought they were doing it. So in their best intentions, they were hopelessly off the mark. So they wisely then looked to diversity, to the board, to try and see if they could bring this element of conversation into the mix. So they brought in a woman who had vast general business experience, had run companies, run massive big projects, worked in a male-dominated space, worked at the customer, worked in retail, fast-moving goods, you name it. She'd done a lot of good things. So she joined this financial services organization that was really conservative and really old-fashioned, and considered a minor change in their technology as transformation. I thought, what are you going to call it when you do get to do some transformation? Because this is just a little bit of data you're playing with. It's quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
And what actually happened, that woman got extremely desperate, absolutely and utterly desperate. And she hung on for the board evaluation so she could get her voice in, because she wasn't getting her voice anywhere. And this was now her last voice, and she was exiting. She's still there now. And this is like 5, 6 years and 7 years later now. She's probably getting towards the end of her 9 years. But the board did not realize they had zero mindfulness of listening, absorbing, respecting, understanding her diversity and all her diversity of thought. And all these men of a kind, unfortunately, in this particular circumstance, said, but she's not financial services. She's never studied financial services. I said, she actually by now probably knows more than you do about being a director in financial services, because she's made it her business to understand that role. So she is bringing context, but she's bringing everything else. And these guys just had no cognizance that they were pushing her out all the time. And that's where, talking about it and actually getting the elephant on the table and saying, this is how bad it looks, and them working with the company secretary, with the team, measuring her feeling of being included and respected, change that organization completely. Have you got similar examples in that inclusive mindset? This is what I'm trying to reach into.
Yeah, inclusive mindset. I just think, there it is. That's what we're striving for. And the other word that I picked up on, voice. I'm so passionate about people having a voice for many, many reasons, for personal reasons, my whole history of, there's a golden thread running through the last couple of decades of my career choices and family choices. Everything is about giving people a voice. And I think ultimately that's what we're striving for, because if people can use their voice and be heard, then that's an inclusive mindset.
And be respected. Not only, I hear you, but I'm not respecting you. You do need that respect and counter debate. Because it may not be right for the business.
But you're allowed to
assume every voice is right. You've got to find what's right.
And then that leads into the sense of belonging that we're striving for as part of being an inclusive organisation. No, absolutely. I think, just going back to my point about one of the things that we offer are these anonymous confidential surveys for organisations. And it's really interesting, the data that we get and the reports that we create for organisations, because like I say, there's a lot of organisations who've done their measurement or their diversity measurement, and then we do it, and it's really interesting because ours is different, and we don't often mirror what internal anonymous surveys have shown. And I think that's because there might still be a little bit of apprehension if you do, even though you're reassuring your people that this is anonymous, there's still a little bit of apprehension where people might think, yeah, but if I say on this, is it anonymous? Because if I say on this that I'm dyslexic or I'm ADHD or that I'm trans or anything, and when HR or my managers are interviewing me or doing my appraisal, will they know that it was me that I've now said this? So there's a little bit, so therefore I'm not going to say it. And then therefore it comes out in their own anonymous surveys, the data, and we know data is absolutely hopeless unless it's true, unless it's as accurate as it can be, because the worst thing that you want is incorrect data, because that sets you off this way when you should be going that way. And so because we are an independent third party, full of GDPR and everything, but because we have that extra layer of anonymity and reassurance of confidentiality, people feel a little bit safer to tell us certain aspects about how they self-identify, which I think is really interesting. And that goes back to my point in that we can often say to organizations, you're actually quite diverse here. But what we need to do is bring up that sense of inclusion, give people their voices, make them have a sense of belonging, give that, open that, create that inclusive mindset that you've just been talking so passionately about. And I think that's really, really interesting. And also part of our surveys are also around the culture of an organization, as well as how people self-identify. So it's very much this is who your people really are, and this is what they really think. I'm just going back to my point. It's okay if it's not great, because this is your baseline.
And starting point. This is the journey beginning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what it's doing, just by doing that, it's demonstrating to your people, we're taking this seriously. And it may be that we're not fully inclusive. It might be that we haven't got a really great inclusive mindset. We don't know. So what we're doing is we're giving you a voice. We are giving you a voice via these anonymous surveys with wider thinking, so that you can express things that you want to express. And then we're going to open the conversations when we get that feedback, and then we're going to evolve, and we're going to evolve. But I think just that very first step is such a huge huge movement within the culture of your organization, and a huge step towards becoming a better, having a better inclusive mindset, giving your people a voice.
Yeah, and that indicates the journey that has begun, just as you say, by starting that process.
Yeah.
When you're looking at inclusivity and you're looking at the way people behave, and you get to, and just for a second, we just go back to your surveys. I know, because I do board evaluations, I'm the independent. I don't tell anybody who told me what. Yeah, it is kept secret, and it stays that way.
Yeah.
So I get your point totally, and I do agree with you. It does make a difference, and it makes a huge difference. By the time they finish with me, that's just like being with agony art. I didn't know I could talk about these kind of things. Goodness, I feel so relieved. It is actually quite an interesting exchange.
Yeah.
And the reason is I can ask questions the boss would never ask. Wouldn't think of ask, because it's not trained to either. And people face to face, you can't ask certain things. It's not appropriate. Under GDPR, it's not appropriate. Under respect for individuals, you can't ask certain things. But as an external, you know how to phrase the question. You have experience in building questionnaires. You know how to take the candidate along a journey to tell you what it is that business needs to know. So the expertise of going to an external is cheap, actually.
Yeah.
You get the right stuff.
Yeah, because I think there's a couple of really interesting points that you're raising there. The first point is, by coming to people like us, is that we also create that awareness of what is diversity. Going back to our much earlier point about people thinking that, well, it's about gender or ethnicity. And I think people need to have that awareness of what is diversity and what is equity. You know, I explained it right up at the top, but a lot of people don't even know what these words actually mean. And I think that's something that we help do as well, like bring it right back so that everybody knows what exactly are we talking about here.
And people can be relaxed. The boss knows what it means, not what he or she thinks it might mean.
And that we all
gives a comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going back to your point about people feeling that they can't express certain things, or that by speaking to you or coming to people like us, or just an independent third party, that they can express something because certain questions are asked that have perhaps never even been asked. But one of the things that we provide on our anonymous surveys in many aspects is the option prefer not to say. Now, I think that for me is one of the really interesting crunchy bits of data, because if people, when we provide a report, and if there's like in all the different categories, I always look at the prefer not to say, and I think
how many, which questions,
yeah, what other questions, and so if you've got something that well, it could be anything. Say neurodiversity, actually, because that's something that a lot of people feel that they have to mask. And so if you have a report, if we provide a report and there's like 15% in the prefer not to say, that's interesting. That's saying a lot about the organisation. That's data that's really opens up, which I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to numbers and data, because I love it, because it all tells stories. But that 15% in prefer not to say under neurodiversity opens up a whole load of conversations about what's going on in your organisation.
It's not a safe place. That much you already know. So now you've got to help them make it a safe.
Exactly. And then when going back to my point about it being a journey, and then if you go on a journey and then come back to us in, say, 12, 18 months and do a little bit of booster awareness and repeat surveys, and then in 12, 18 months, that same data point has now gone from 15% to, say, 7%. Wow. I mean, look at what you can prove with your consistent, valid metrics about the journey that you are taking your organisation on. And that is when you really, really get to interesting points about, look at where we were in 2023 and now, and be really like, that wasn't really great. But that's okay. Going back to my point, it's okay. Look at where we are now in 24 and 25. That prefer not to say, you're shrinking it because you're becoming more inclusive. Your inclusive mindset. And it's a beautiful thing. It's really beautiful when you see that in organizations that have gone on this journey, and it's like, wow, like, yeah, this
does make a difference.
It really does.
I shared that story a moment ago about a sort of very much a male pale stale group who just could not understand that there was other views in the world other than theirs.
Yeah.
Working for another organization, FTSE 250 company, decent organization, with an incredible chairman who chaired a number of different businesses and was competent and comfortable from, and I'm going to use terminology just to give a concept, blue collar to somebody else on the board of directors. So it didn't matter where the person was in the organization. This man had empathy and understanding and respect for all the roles in the organization. And these organizations were in manufacturing, they were in building and construction. They weren't pretty consultancy businesses. And they brought in their first female onto the board. And that person came with a digital competency. So that's two things in one. And was probably a good 20 years younger than the average age of the board. So she brought 3 diversities. And he managed and led that board. And she said to me after she'd been there for 6 months, I've had many jobs. I have never been in such an inclusive environment as that board gave me. They gave me and empowered me as a woman, as a young person, as a digital expert, to have a voice to make a difference in that organization. And that was down to one person who turned from the top, was able to think differently. Just a quick point to change before we run out of time. I can't believe what is happening to the time. One of the things boards got to do, one of the critical roles a board has, is to make decisions. And we have, as we know, the laugh, the joke, the saying is, if you want a decision, don't ask a committee to do it because they'll never get there. Yeah, and that's the lack of ability to deal with diversity. We are 50 years on from that saying. But the important thing is things like bias, things about our diverse points of view, demands and influences, expectations, egos. I mean, so we've got a melting pot of things that are going to get in the way of making decisions for the business. And just looking at all the things we've talked about today, and you chatting to the chairman and you're giving the chairman advice as to how he or she is going to lead this group of people, what would be the types of things you would want to cover in that conversation?
I think I would encourage leaders to lead, and I would say this is a lot of work, but it's worth it. And don't be overwhelmed, because there is so much potential here. And I think our leaders need to lead in terms of openness, encouraging open conversations. I think even if you start in modest ways, thinking about improving things just 1% so that it doesn't become overwhelming. And I would just say we've got to drive forward. You can't do nothing. That's just not
an option anymore.
Not an option. It's not an option. And just going back to your point about that woman going to that board and it just being such a fantastic place to work, I just want to point out that person, the loyalty that you get from people who are happy to work there and that feel included, the happiness level goes up, the loyalty level goes up, absenteeism goes down, staff turnover goes down. And so you just have to do something. I mean, you're going to get left behind. Do you really look at your competitors? Why not be pioneering, be leaders, be really proud of what you're doing on this journey, and leave your competitors behind. And that's what I would say. Be strategic about this and just be leaders and be pioneering, and roll out that awareness, roll out that measurement, and start that journey.
It's also important. We haven't covered much of E because that is a year's worth of subject matter, least of all the last 2 or 3 minutes of the conversation.
Yeah.
But I would sense it would be valuable to understand from your stakeholders, primarily your internal stakeholder, but your customer, external stakeholder, your investors, people in your supply chain, those kind of stakeholders, to understand from each of them, what are the elements in E that you think are important for this business to be considering? And do you find companies are having that conversation with their stakeholders? I don't see it much yet. I don't see enough of it, put it that way. We're not asking our staff what part of E should we worry about.
Yeah, I totally agree that you're hitting on something that I think is untapped and sadly very uncharted territory, in that territory has to be explored a little bit more, because we need to be looking at when we're going back to the S as well, because that leads to society, doesn't it? And we need to be looking at who is in our supply chain, who are these people when we're talking about ethics, and it all comes back to your organization's brand and your organization's reputation. There are countless examples that we could talk about all day long where really high-end brands, their reputation has plummeted because of their supply chain, and that hasn't been properly managed, and there are ethical questions around that. And so that in the ESG lens is absolutely something that needs attention.
We've got a minute left. Any any words the wise owl of wisdom is going to leave for us?
Just take those first steps. It's okay.
Yeah.
Take those first steps. You know, it's take it in baby steps, and then you will see how it will just open up an amazing world within your organization. Embrace equity, actually. Those are my final words.
Couldn't end our International Women's discussion, board governance discussion, corporate inclusivity mindset that we've covered, and all of this that we, if you sort of synthesize what we've covered today, is how do we create happy people
Yeah.
in all our stakeholder groups to actually allow this business to reach its purpose in the most simplistic, easy journey we could wish for.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I agree.
Thank you. You and I could carry on chatting forever.
Yeah, I think we might. Yeah. Yeah.
we might just keep going on this one.
Yeah.
But
No,
really a huge thanks to you, Jacqui.
my
I find
pleasure.
your insights it's a lot of, it's spoken and delivered with so much common sense. And that's something so few people seem to have. And this is all common sense. It's not rocket science.
It
But
is.
your love for data gives you the credibility to take common sense and allow it to be absorbed by others. So
Yeah.
I really thank you and Wider Thinking for the insights you've shared with us today. And everyone, I encourage you to go and have a look at our website. It's fun. They do spend a lot of time getting to the nub of understanding people,
Yeah.
which is really the beginning of the baby steps you need to take. So thank you to everybody for attending. Really hope that you enjoyed it. And to those who are listening to the recording at this point in time, I look forward to hearing through Genius Boards, through Wider Thinking, how we can help organizations at a board level, at executive leadership level, departmental, regional levels, actually do the right thing easily. So thank you, Jacqui. Your common sense and what wisdom of a wise owl has been extremely useful and valuable today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. An absolute pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody. Bye-bye.